generations. There we go. So, however, we acknowledge that racism and other systemic barriers mean that Black, Indigenous, and other racialized people are marginalized and excluded from many arts and academic settings in 2020. As a result, neither the research world nor the Suzuki community reflects the racial and socioeconomic diversity of our larger society. As we envision the next 30 years for IRSTE, we recommit to our values of inclusion and diversity. We will also strive to welcome new contributors, reach new audiences, and to examine our evidence through the lens of equity. So today, before we get into that, just a few housekeeping items. I'd like to ask everyone to mute their microphone if you haven't already done so. If you have computer issues or the picture is freezing, you may want to mute your video as well, or turn off your video as well. All the speakers will be open. And the chat will be open if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to make. All the sessions will be recorded, and the links will be sent to you at the end of today, or for certain by Monday. They are also on www.irste.org. That's our website, irste.org. You'll find them there, and I believe on the SAA website as well. Okay, so today we're particularly excited. We have a number of Suzuki early education teachers with us, in addition to the research participants. And we're particularly excited to welcome back Dr. Beatrice Ilari. Beatrice was with us 2 years ago and talked to us about parents' roles and children and music education, and this time she's going to be talking about the role of pro-social skills in music education. And she is an assistant professor of music education at USC Thornton School of Music. She holds an arts licentiate degree from music from the University of Sao Paulo, a master's degree in violin performance from Montclair State University, and a PhD in music education from McGill University. Before joining USC, she was associate professor of music education at the Federal University of Paraná in Brazil, where she created and directed a large early childhood university outreach music program. She has conducted extensive research with infants, preschoolers, school-age children, and their families to examine the intersections between music, child development, cognition, and culture. She has published several books, as well as has published in many important research journals. Her last book, I think, is Children's Home Musical Experiences Across the World. And she is currently the editor for Perspectives, the Journal of Early Childhood Music and Movement Association. So with great pleasure, we welcome Dr. Beatrice Ilari. Oh, are you on? Okay, great.
Here we go. Thank you so much, Pat, for the introduction. I am so delighted to be back here. Thank you, Kate, for the invitation. I know that when you asked me to join, we were in a different world. So I've given a lot of thought about this presentation, and I thought that it would be interesting to, have two moments, one where I present and I talk about my research, but then a second moment when we have a chance to, talk about the research, but most importantly, to connect these ideas to our practice in music teaching and learning. Because we're in a different world today, and we don't know the world will be in once the pandemic is over. So I think I have a lot of questions. I think many researchers probably asking, what is the relevance of what we do in this day and time? And so that's a question that has been important to me. So I really want to hear back from you. But again, I'm delighted to be here and to celebrate the 30th anniversary of IRSTE with all of you, and with Bob Duke, who's a good friend from a very long time. I'm just going to share my screen. Will you allow me to share my screen? And Here we go. Not yet. Yeah, not yet. Thank you. All right. Okay. Can you see my screen? Okay, very good. All right. So let's talk a little bit about pro-social skills. So the title of my talk, as Pat mentioned, is Does Participation in Formal Music Education Programs Enhance Children's Pro-Social Skills? Go here. So just a little bit about me. You know, aside from my academic curriculum, I have taught general music for several years. I taught Suzuki, that was the beginning of my career, and I see my first Suzuki teacher also with us, Shinobu Saito. So that was my first teaching experience. And I taught for several years. I taught Suzuki. I directed an early childhood music program for a long time, and now I'm a music education professor at USC. But I'm also a parent. I have 2 kids, and I'm a Suzuki parent. So I've been, thinking. Suzuki has been in my life for a very long time. It's a very important part of my experiences. And as Pat mentioned, I've been studying music and child development. So I'm very interested in how music features in children's lives, how children develop musical skills, but also how they develop through their musical experiences. And as I've mentioned, I'm going to do this talk in 2 parts. So in the first part, I'm going to talk about music as a social activity, just a little bit of theory. I'm not going to bore you too much. Talk about pro-social behaviors, and then I'm going to mention 2+1 studies. Why do I mean 2+1? Because initially I was just going to talk about early childhood, but I realized that there are folks here who teach slightly older children, and we did, as I mentioned 2 years ago, we did the big longitudinal study at USC, and we also collected measures on social and pro-social skills. I will share those with you as well. And then the second part is the big so what question. Like, okay, well, this is great, but how does that connect to what we do? And this is where I want us to spend some time talking to each other about music education, social emotional skills, and of course, COVID-19, or in the era of COVID-19. So just as a conversation starter, as I said, Shinichi Suzuki's work has been very important to me. And now that I'm a Suzuki parent, I've been reading his work again, now in a very different light, wearing my parent hat. And there's a very long passage, which I didn't realize, but I cited in my dissertation many years ago, where Suzuki is describing the experiences, if you might recall that, the experiences of Hiromi, who's 5 months, and her sister, Atsumi, who's 6. And the sister had been playing the violin for a long time, and was playing the Vivaldi A minor violin concerto in book 4. And he writes, and I just cut it short, the very long passage. He says something like, I was anxious to know what the effect this had on a 5-month-old baby, so I announced that I would like to play something and stood up with my violin. And so he plays, a minuet, and then he switches to the A minor violin concerto, and then the baby recognizes the piece. Now, I studied infant research in my past life, and it's interesting that Suzuki wrote this in 1969, or the version that I have is the one from 1969, but infant research did not come into play before, or at least some of the most prominent studies, the 1980s, the early 1980s. So he was a pioneer in that sense as well. And I think in the early years world, sometimes we forget about that, but he had an influence in what we do. And also in, helping us see something that we now know quite well, that the early years of life, there are these optimal time for both child development and also for music learning. Now, when I say early years, some people think, is it birth to 3? Is it 0 to 5? Is it 0 to 8? And there are different definitions. I like to think of 0 to 8 for a very important reason. Well, first of all, this is what organizations like UNESCO tend to recognize. Why? Because one thing that happens in children's life is entrance into formal schooling, which in most parts of the world happens at around age 5 or 6. And there's a shift that happens, but the shift is not immediate. right? It takes time. If you have children of that age, you know what I'm talking about. It takes a while for children to adapt to school, to the new rules, to friends, to this new world that they're navigating. And so this is what some of these world organizations tend to recognize, that there's an adaptation. Yes, they're not 5-year-olds anymore, but they're not 10-year-olds either. So, you know, these are very movable definitions. But this is the age I'm kind of thinking about right here. Now, when you think about the early childhood, one of the things that's interesting that we're seeing in the 90s, we had a lot of research on the Mozart effect or the effects of music education. Bob wrote a really piece that has been very important to me in Update about the other Mozart effect, right? Where, you know, the criticisms associated with the research and how we should be thinking about these effects in music. Now, in the last 10 years or 15 years, we're seeing more and more research on the effects of music, but not done by music educators. This research is predominantly being done by neuroscientists and music psychologists. So they've been looking again to issues of, you know, how does music develop the brain, and how does music help develop cognitive skills, executive functioning, and so on. But what's interesting is we're still not looking a lot at the social world. And I'm always puzzled by that. I understand why. It's very difficult to study the social world, social emotional learning, because when you answer a questionnaire, is it the same thing as when you're going through an emotionally charged event? There are lots of things to think about. But so we see a lot of this research, but there's still a lot to learn about the social world. And this is something I've been studying for, oh my gosh, a long time now, trying to, you know, tackle this issue. So let's talk about the research just with this introduction. So music is a social activity. And here's a scene from COVID-19, or scenes from COVID-19 that you might have seen if you read the newspapers. And these are newspapers from all over the world. So this idea that, you know, people are making music and, you know, on their porches, on their balconies. So here there's scenes from Barcelona. You see the Sagrada Familia there, from Italy, from Brazil. So, you know, people trying to connect using music to express their emotions, to communicate, but also to be in touch with other people. One thing that COVID has done is taken away, or, you know, opportunities to be with other people, which is so important to all of us. So, but here I think this, you know, aside from the romanticization of some of these images that you read and, oh, you know, how great, there is something to be said about them, which is this issue of music being a very important social activity in our lives. Just a little bit, and I told you I wouldn't bore you with too much theory, but just a couple of writings that you may find interesting or important. So in 1989, musicologist Christopher Small from New Zealand, he wrote a book that was very important to me called Musicking, The Meanings of Performing and Listening. So I think what was important about this book, which a lot of music educators seem to like and value, is that he told us, well, music is not just something to be learned. It's not just what's written on the page, but it is a form of action. It's a form of thinking. And he coined this term musicking, which people now use quite often. And this is, you know, one of the quotes from the book. He says, to music is to take part in any capacity in a musical performance, whether by performing, by listening, by rehearsing or practicing, by providing material for performance, what is called composing, or by dancing. So he takes, you know, musicology to a different level. He's saying, well, we can't just look at scores. We have to look at what people are doing. A few years later, Tom Torino, an ethnomusicologist from University of Illinois, put out this book called Music as Social Life. Now, he is also a musicologist, but looking at music from the perspective of ethnomusicology. And one of the things that comes across in this book is this idea of the humanness in music, how music is something that makes us human. He talks about music as something that's communicative, that integrates and unites activities. He also talks about music as something that bridges the possible and the actual. So think about the images in Europe or in Brazil, you know, people making music on their balconies, how that connects to that idea, I think. And he also brought something that I think COVID is challenging a little bit, but these four modes of musical engagement. He talks about participatory, or music where you're just invited to jump in and it doesn't matter if you're the expert or not. Everyone is part of that community. Presentational music, which is what a lot of us do. You go to a concert, you sit, you have your role as an audience member, and there is a presenter, an instrumentalist, there's an orchestra, there's something that we are listening to. Then high fidelity, just recordings, and studio art music. And there are lots of issues with this, but I want you to think about the participatory and presentational. And again, COVID has turned all these definitions on their heads, right? Think about choirs. I was talking to colleagues at SC. How are you going to do your rehearsal now that you can't have people in the room? Choirs depend on that. So all of these things we need to think about, but Torino stressed those things for us. A few years later, Stefan Koch from the neurosciences, he talked about the seven C's, or seven social functions in music. So how music, is so important for our social lives. So music brings us in contact with other people. It makes us think about the world or engage in social cognition. It connects to what we call copathy, or the social aspect of empathy. It communicates ideas, it coordinates action. So think about if you have kids playing together, if we're not coordinated, if we're not together in time, it's cacophony, it's not music, right? We need to be together. We need to coordinate our bodies, our emotions, to be together. Cooperation, and hopefully social cohesion. And the last one I wanted to mention is Ian Cross, who is one of my favorite musicologists. He also talks about how when we participate actively, so the same thing as Cross was saying, music as a form of action. So when we're actively making music, we align our own emotional states with those of the people we're collaborating with. And this may give us a rise to a sense of an empathic community. So one of the things he talks about is how when we're together in time, we align our bodies, our gestures, but we also forget about our, the things that make us different. Or maybe we are not, we don't like the same sports teams, or we don't vote for the same political party. It doesn't matter. In that moment, we're together in time, we're making music, we forget about those issues. We're focusing on the music and on being together. So music has all this potential. So my question is always, okay, why would music promote the social and pro-social skills? Well, according to these theorists, there are all these things. We're together in time, we interpret and we share emotions, we learn about musical narratives within the music and the text that's in the music, or the stories being, composer stories. So we learn about the other, and we develop social bonds. And now going back to young children and to, my own research. So young children are often not on their own, right? Well, nowadays in COVID-19, we have to figure out ways of parenting and working. That's a different story. But normally there's somebody watching them. There's somebody nearby. It could be a parent, it could be a community member, it could be an older sibling. Usually there is somebody with them. So musically is the same thing. We have a very important role. We know that. We promote we develop the environment. We bring materials for them to listen to. We might have instruments laying around in the house, but children will engage with different people. They learn from their peers. We see this a lot when you're teaching in groups, that they bring repertoire. Where's that coming from? And that's from school or from a friend. So there's a lot that happens. So the social part is very important. And now the other piece of this, which is important to understand, is there's also skills. So one is social skills, the other one pro-social. And what are pro-social skills? What they are these voluntary acts that will benefit other people. So doing things like sharing things. If you work with little kids, that's very hard. But sharing is very important. Helping people, caring, showing that you care about, they're in distress and you're helping, you're bringing a little kid might bring you a teddy bear to help you if they notice that something is not going well with you, or cooperating. So these are all things that in the end can create what psychologists will call harmonious relationships. And of course, harmonious for us in music is a little bit more complicated. If we say, well, we're in harmony, that can mean a bunch of things. But in this case, meaning positive relationships. So last big slide on theory. So prosocial behaviors and development. So we know that they emerge early in life. So Laura Cirelli, and I know Kate Anderson also worked with Laura, these projects looking at babies, right? Babies helping each other, helping people, and the role of music. But we know so we know that prosocial behaviors emerge early in life. They are influenced by family members, by friends, teachers, and others. They help develop these harmonious, as I said, positive relationships. And they are also markers of social competence in childhood and adolescence. So being able to engage in these behaviors. So looking at the literature, what does the literature say about prosocial skills? So you have a big distinction. So you have laboratory research, so done in usually university labs, and we find a lot of positive results in these studies. You know, children doing small, sometimes short duration musical activities, maybe singing a song, and then you test them right after, and you see that, you know, that it was probably that musical event, and you control your study and so on, that might have led to prosocial skills, helping more, sharing more, and so on. Now, when we look at educational spaces, which to me is very important, you have mixed findings. And to me, it makes sense because it's very difficult to measure social and prosocial skills, but there are lots of things to look into in educational spaces, lots of methods as well. So with that in mind, there were two big studies that influenced our thinking. So just the broad literature, and now these two studies. One was a study done in 2009 in Germany, where they found that 3 and 4-year-olds, they helped and shared more after they played musical games with their peers and with the experimenters. So they set up this environment where the kids would play this game. There were two conditions. One, there were kids who just played together, and the other one, kids who played things like games that involve music, singing, and so on. And they found more helping and sharing. And more recently, Australian and British researchers found in this very big national sample that there was a big correlation between parent-child music activities in the home and prosocial behaviors at age 5. But of course, this, you can't establish causal links. This was a big correlational study. So when we read all of this, we thought, okay, why don't we look at educational settings? So here are my 3 studies, 2 plus 1. So the first one was, we just wanted to see, do we find these correlations, these associations between, you know, time in music, or making music, or being engaged in music in early childhood, and prosocial behaviors. So we visited a very well-known early childhood program here in the US, well-established, beautiful facility, everything very nicely sorted, good materials. We had children who took part in the study. They were about 4 years old, mean age of 46 months. Most children were in preschool. They were from middle and upper middle class families, and this is not surprising. A lot of early childhood programs still, you know, we tend to serve more of this population. We're working to increase our participants. And children were taking part in this early childhood music program, the same program, for 1 to 46 months. Okay, so meaning that some children had been in the program since they were born. Okay, this was very teacher-centered as well. And what we did was we invited children to play what we call the prosocial game. So basically, I visited with them and I said, you know, I'm going to tell you a story about my 3 animal friends. And it started with a giraffe, Mimo. And I told them they're lost in the forest. And there are these 2 big towers. And 2 of them were so scared that they were hiding in these towers. Do you want to help me build houses for them? And the children were usually very excited. This was individually, me and 1 child at a time. And so we would first build a house for the giraffe. I wanted to make sure they knew how to take turns. That's important in early childhood. So once I realized, okay, now we're ready to play. Now let's go and find the other animal. So which tower are we visiting first? And then we would visit the tower, and I would say, okay, now we have to sing a song to wake them up. So we would sing something together. We would clap. we would do a clapping game, would make some music. The children didn't know there was a little cord in the back, so I would pull and the animal would fall, and they would think it was amazing that they're singing or clapping to that. But that's what we did. So we would pick up, the animal, and we would go to the other side of the room, pick each a bag of blocks to build a house for the second animal. And what would happen then was I would drop my pieces. They didn't know I knew that my bag was torn, and so the pieces would fall. Would they help me? And then we would do the same thing with the other animal, the third animal, the elephant. Same thing, we would sing, clap, would pull the little cord, the animal would fall. I would say, okay, let's build a house for this other animal now. Once we picked up the bags, my bag had fewer blocks than their bag. So at a certain point, I would say, oh no, I don't have any more. I so wanted to continue playing, but I don't have any more. To see, would they share after I complain? Would they give excuses, or would they just say, well, whatever, I'm going to continue playing? Okay, so this is what we did. And the parents, in the meantime, they answered. They had a couple of scales they had to complete: how pro-social their kids were, how involved they were in music in the home, and also musical interests. So when we looked at our data, this is what we found. First of all, children who spent more time in the music programs, so who had reported that they'd been for a long time in that program, they never stopped. We had, the school gave us information about these children, their attendance. So we knew that children who spent more time, they seemed to help us more. Again, we can't say that one thing caused the other, but there was some association there. The second thing that we found was that children whose parents reported that they had higher musical interest, they liked music more, they were interested in music, were also the ones that helped more. And the third finding was that children whose parents reported that they were very active musically in the home, they were the ones who actually tended to share more pieces with us. So again, this was correlational. We're just looking at associations. We can't say the music program did this, right? But there was something there, and this was consistent with some of the the literature that's out there. So with these findings in mind, we thought, okay, now let's go into schools. But now let's go into schools where children don't necessarily have music education. Remember, in that sample, in study 1, I had this very wealthy population. Children were being very stimulated. They usually had a mom at home or somebody at home working with them, reading with them, doing all sorts of things. They were in great preschools. What if we went to now a public school around our university and we did the same game with the children, but we would offer our own music program. So we would design it and offer instruction to these children. So we did, the schools allowed us to do 5 weeks of musical instruction. They also agreed that we did some kind of random assignment, which is very important for this type of work. So we mixed children from different transitional kindergarten and kindergarten classes. So they let us really, which is sometimes complex in schools, but to play with their programming for a little bit so we could do this study. And we did the same pro-social game. Because there are lots of English language learners, we looked at vocabulary and we also looked at executive function skills. I'm not going to talk a lot about executive function, but it's something that we measured as well. So this is just, because we're all music teachers, this is really important, and programs are really important. So this is what we did. We started with a welcome song. We did action songs, a lot of inner listening, hear the song in your head. We introduced them to instruments, movement activities, and we had instrumental music with props. Then we had children relax a little bit so we could turn them back to their teachers and do a goodbye song at the end. So these were 2 30-minute music classes per week for 5 weeks. And the children who were in the so-called control group, they received music after we collected all our data. So everyone in the school took part in the music program, but at different times. What were the findings? Children helped a lot in both groups. They helped more after the 5 weeks, perhaps because they also knew us or because music. We thought maybe there was a cultural effect. So a lot of children are from Latino cultures, and there's a lot of helping that's expected as well in Latino cultures. So that could be. The other piece was that I was the lady who was there and me and the other experimenter, we were doing other activities. We're the people who gave them stickers at the end. We took them out of pulled them out of their classes. There was a lot of, playfulness in what we were doing, one-on-one attention. So maybe that's why they were helping us as well. Or the adult role, there's an adult in power here. So we don't know. But the helping scores, we didn't find differences. Sharing scores, we saw a trend in the music group, but it wasn't statistically significant. So children music helped a little bit more, but it wasn't enough. So what we did was we had two classes that couldn't participate at the first moment. So we did a small follow-up with them. We didn't have enough children to have large statistical power, but what we did was we did the same experiment, same 5 weeks of music. We had good teachers working with them and so on. And what we found, we redesigned things so that they would share pieces with each other. And we observed them, okay, what do they do? What are the strategies they do? So we went, looked in more depth into what children were doing during the game. And what we found was that the children who helped were the children who had developed they were not playing parallel, they were playing together. So they would say, okay, we're going to build this house. And why don't we make a roof here? Why don't we do this? Here there should be a swimming pool, or whatever it is that they were thinking. But there was some common goals. And every time this happened, children would say, okay, you don't have pieces, here you go, here's another one. And now they're helping a peer. They're not helping the lady who gave them stickers. I was just sitting them to make sure that everything went okay. So it was very clear to us that playing together was something that had a role in sharing skills. So moving on to the last study with older children. So 2 years ago, I talked about the longitudinal study and the differences and what families had about their experiences in music education. So remember, this was 3 groups of children in a STEM-inspired program learning violin and viola, children in soccer, and a control group. And we followed them for 5 years. We finished collecting data in this big study. But we also looked at socio-emotional skills and pro-social skills. So as I said, this is the 5-year study. With these 3 groups for 5 years. So a very low income population as well. So with pro-social, the measures that we did, with pro-social behaviors, we did a similar game as the building blocks, but we didn't, when they were 6 years old, that's when they started in the study. They were still interested in blocks, but they weren't interested in blocks later on, nor in the stories of animals or anything. So what we did was a sticker sharing game in year 3 and 4. Basically, we told them, here are 3 bags. I'm going to leave the room. 1 bag is for you. 1 bag is for your best friend. 1 bag is for somebody you don't know. You're going to divide those stickers in any way you like. Just pick up your own bag when you're ready, knock on the door, and I'll come get you. And so we counted, how many they would distribute to other kids, how much they would share. We also used that standardized instrument called BASC2 that measures socio-emotional learning. So the kids fill them out and the parents fill them out. We also looked at drumming and rhythmic synchronization. So in the study with school-age children, we didn't find differences for the pro-social scores, but we found that children in the music groups shared, there was a correlation between how much they shared and how if they were better in synchronizing their beat to music. So going back to Ian Cross, that idea that we're together in time, and so meaning that the more we can do this in this was the more we saw children share. Again, we can't say that one thing caused the other. However, when we looked at the best scores, the ones that parents filled out of socio-emotional learning and the kids filled out, what we found was that parents in music and sports, they rated their children lower in aggression and hyperactivity or hyperactive skills, and higher in emotional stability. So I'm not going to bore you with too many graphs, but this is the graph for hyperactivity. So the higher the scores, it means the more at risk children are for this particular behavior. So what we found was that in music and sports, over the years, parents rated their children lower, which is and same thing with aggression. So here, just to sum up some of the lessons learned. Again, these are 3 different studies, different populations, but there were some some insights, I think, from these studies. One is this idea that, yes, perhaps participation in formal music programs could be associated with the development of prosocial skills and emotional regulation in childhood. Now, of course, we understand the limitations of these studies. They're very small, different populations in different places, and so on. But there's something for us to continue to be exploring. And it also, I think our findings align with some of the things we hear from teachers a lot. So I hear a lot of my students who direct bands, they talk about the band family, or how choirs get people to connect, to develop bonds, and so on. Um, Also in studios, Suzuki studios, I've heard a lot, well, we have our community, we build relationships in the studios. So perhaps, pro-social skills are in there. That's something that we need to continue exploring. Um, the other piece is that we've been thinking a lot, especially in the early years, the piece of cooperative play, activities that children do together, that they devise their strategies. They may really assist with children sharing, helping, building these relationships and developing pro-social and social skills. So things to think about. Yeah, so what are some implications? And then I'll stop and answer any questions, then we can go and go to part 2 of this talk. But I think some of the things that this study made me think in terms of teaching and learning, and I know a lot of you do this, but the opportunity to talk about emotions in and through music and lessons and group classes is really important, especially now. Share music, performing, in other words, give children agency, opportunities for them to bring things into class and develop these collaborative spaces, very important. Student-to-student projects, things that they can do together, they collaborate and develop these pro-social skills. That's another place where we can, and I think group classes are particularly conducive for that. The other piece that I think, especially in the COVID era, perform for groups that wouldn't otherwise get music. So, now we're all online, or in large part online. Are there opportunities to perform for these groups, to talk to children about people who may not have access to music performance, to hearing other performers, to think about the social world in these ways and relationships in this way. I'm going to stop sharing for now so I can answer any questions, and then I'd be happy to, if you have any questions, then I'd be happy to jump into our discussion mode. Thank you. Let's see, stop sharing. Here we go.
So you can either write your question in the chat, or you can mute yourself and ask your question and then remute. So.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Jenny from Tone Academy in New York City. So thank you so much for all that information. I had a question about if you looked at any of the correlations with students that were showing this cooperative behavior, the pro-social behaviors, when not prompted by a teacher, if it was any of the possible examples when they were spontaneous through the children that had participated in your program.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that question. Yeah, we have a lot of videos, the lessons, which we haven't analyzed yet. So that's one of the things we want to do. But what we tried to do in the follow-up was to have this activity that they weren't sharing with me anymore, that they were sharing with them. And that's the one where we found the cooperative play. But you're absolutely right. I think one of the problems with this research is that we need to observe children in their own spaces, right? This is a very artificial task. It's this lady with all these wonderful stickers and this big smile who comes in, and she's doing all these fun things with us, right? But I think what's really important is what happens in the classroom when we're not there, right? That's where we want to see, and hopefully in the home and in the community and in other spaces. So that's the one we're trying to figure out. And now with COVID, we had to interrupt because online classes and looking at pro-social skills, that's going to be, I think, almost impossible. Maybe I'm wrong, but I want to be there with the kids, sitting on the floor and doing these activities with them, not looking through a video screen. But thank you, absolutely. Let me see. Yeah, if any of the kids have disabilities. So we did not exclude anyone from from this. Everyone participated in the music class. Everyone participated in the data collection. We had 2 children who were nonverbal at all. So these are the only 2 that we excluded from the data because they wouldn't respond to any of our, prompts to play, but everyone took part. Tourette is an interesting case. I think there's some, I know that Oliver Sacks is one who promoted some, the role of music in Tourette syndrome in one of the videos. Was it music in one of the PBS videos? I can look it up. There is some research, not as much as one would like, but there is some research. I'm not super familiar with it, but I know I've read a few things here and there, and for sure. And one of the things with Tourette's that I know that people will do is a lot of drumming, drum circles, so ways to, regulate the body with beat. I don't know if I've answered your question in full, but I think that's where you would look. And I'm sure that you would find some literature, but Sacks is probably one place to start, or could be one good place to start. Any other questions?
Beatrice, it's Kate here. Sorry. Hi. You mentioned that I also have this shared interest in rhythmic synchronization. And I noticed on your summary slide that even though you didn't see differences between groups in prosocial behavior, some of the differences were related to rhythmic synchrony. I wondered if you could explore that finding. I was really intrigued.
Sure. So that was predominantly with the longitudinal study. So we did collect entrainment data for 5 years. We have quite a lot still to go through. And one of the things that we found was basically it was not a very exciting task. It was basically, inviting the kids into the lab, and we had different tempi and sometimes changes, and it would slow down or would, speed up, and they were asked to drum with us. And then we looked at, their synchronization skills. We had 2 conditions, one where they drummed with a computer and one where they drummed with us. And it was not surprising that, the kids did better when there was there. And I know Sebastian Kirchner had shown that, and others had shown the same thing, the importance of somebody else being there, the social piece. We did find, and that's where we found the correlation with prosocial skills in the music children. After 3 years of music, the violinists and violists, they not only synchronized better in this condition, but there was a correlation between the social condition and sharing stickers with people. So that's what we found. Yeah, we're still analyzing that. We have like 5 years of data from that.
Right.
Lots of different, we have fast, slow, fast to slow, slow to fast, individual drumming. So one day we'll get to it, but it's all in there.
Of course. Those data are always messy, but it sounds like maybe there's something to do with sensitivity to the presence and behavior of another person across several contexts.
I would think so. And to me, it makes a lot of sense. Isn't it easier to learn? I mean, I think back to my days as a violinist. I mean, it was so much better. Yes, it's important to study with a metronome, but when I was with my teacher was saying, let's do it together, it was so much easier, right? And more pleasant and all of that, because there is, that feedback from looking at, the expression and the other person who's in there as well. So.
Thank you, Beatrice. And I think we have a question from Barbie Wong, who's raised her hand. Barbie?
Yes. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm curious, if you were given unlimited resources, you didn't have to worry about red tape or anything, what would you like to see in terms of research with music education?
You mean now?
Yeah. What would be your ideal study or studies coming up?
Well, if you had asked me this 6 months ago, I would probably say something different. But today, I think one of the things I would really like to study is well-being, music and well-being, because I think you know, seeing my own kids, the kids around me, the schools, everything that we're all going through worldwide, I think music has that potential. You know, I'm not trying to say music solves all the problems, no, but I do think that music can promote that, especially when we can make music with other people. I'm a big, the social world is really important to me. So that is something that I would like to study, and from lots of different angles, you know, from observation, because I think observation is important, but also from a more, you know, if you want to call it more scientific, that's fine. Even looking at the brain, you know, what are some of the things that happen as we're learning, as we're playing with others, as we are, you know, singing, writing music for other people. So the social piece, but also how does it promote well-being? Because hopefully that's something that will get us in a better shape after this pandemic is over. You know, it's always my hope. So
Thank you.
let's see, is there okay. All right, shall we move into discussion mode?
I did see one hand go up.
All right, thank you, Kate. Let's see.
Just having a bit of trouble. There we go.
Okay.
Ask.
Do you hear me? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you, Beatrice. And you mentioned something about the cultural background of the students.
Yes.
So I was very interested to hear more. If you can tell us more about that. What did you find, and what kind of population you had first? But then, if you found something about that, something interesting to share with us. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. That's a very important question. So the first study was done with a mainly predominantly white population, very wealthy on the East Coast. The second study was done with predominantly Latino students in downtown Los Angeles. The third study was also predominantly Latino and African American students. Just looking at the first two, because the third one, the measures were different, the kids were different age. What we found was the kids in the school, the Latino children, tended to help much more. Sharing is very difficult. Like, it's my cookie and that's it. You know, you're 4 years old, you're not going to share, but helping, yes. So we found more of that. And talking to the teachers, knowing the families, as I know some of them, some Latino families, there's a lot of expectations, and we know from the literature on, you know, raising children, that there's this expectation that they might help by taking care of their siblings because they might have large families, or there's some cultural expectations that are in there. And what I did when we saw these results, I went to talk to one of my colleagues at USC who studies empathy and groups, and she was saying, you know, the problem with some of these tasks is that different cultural groups will respond differently based on the expectation. So she was doing a big study with I think Korean Americans, and she was saying for some children they might not pick up your stuff, not because they don't want to help you, but because it's your stuff and you're not. So you have to be very careful when you're interpreting, you know, your findings based on the cultural groups. So not to say, well, one group helps more, shares more. No, you have to take all these issues into account. So, and the other piece was, of course, I was in the school, I was the lady with the stickers. That's how I became known. Like, oh, the sticker lady is here, right? So of course I had a lot of power with the kids, right? I'm pulling them out, and there were, to the point that there were two kids who, they told me, oh, I didn't go yet. I didn't. And I was pretty sure that I had already collected data. And the kid said to me, well, it's way more fun to be here. I'm like, yeah, well, you have to go back to your classroom. I already have your data. Because I was like, I'm pretty sure I know. Of course, there were 150 of them. But I'm very good at memorizing, not names, but faces. I don't forget a face. So I kept thinking, I've seen this child already. I'm pretty sure. And at the end, I said, he made the same mistake. I'm like, no, okay. You told me this story again. Yes, I did. So, you know, these are things that, you know, in the school setting was very different than, also the first study was done in the summer. This one was done during the school year. So all of these things we need to take into account for sure. But there are cultural differences, and we always have to be very careful. And remembering that a lot of these protocols were devised in one culture. So I was basing it off the work with my German colleagues. But would it be more appropriate to design something different? probably, and that's something we need to be working on.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Of course. Let's see. Our local are entirely online. The final performances I have to need. Yeah, Cynthia, thank you for your comment. That's exactly what we're gonna discuss. You know, how do we deal with our, you know, the social aspect of music making, not just with little kids, but with kids and teenagers during our era. So I'm going to, if that's okay, Pat, I'm gonna share my screen again, and then we'll start our discussion mode. Hang on, here we go. Share, here we go. All right, so very briefly, so as I said to you, one of my questions has been to myself, to my students, you know, thinking about the research world, everything that we're going through is, after COVID, what is the relevance of music in our lives? Social interactions and well-being, you know, that away from us. And how can we enact pro-social behaviors and social distancing? So one of the things that I did, and this is still, you know, on the works, but 2 months into the pandemic, I designed a survey with Joe and another student, Jillian Lee, to send out to parents. It was not a music study, but as a parent, I was super stressed out, and I wanted to know, are other parents in the same situation? Has this been, you know, am I just complaining too much? What's going on? And so I sent out, you know, asking parents what they were doing. I was curious to know what are kids doing in terms of extracurricular activities. That's something I've always been interested in. And at the end, there was this big open question. So I had more than 200 parents answer it. So remember, this was around weeks 8 to 10 after we were sent home and schools shut down. And I asked parents to, is there anything you'd like to say about this time? So for much to my surprise, I had pages and pages of parental response. Usually in surveys, people don't want to answer. They're done. They're like, okay, I'm done. I've clicked. I don't want to write. But they wrote quite a lot. And these are very common responses. So time of great fear, my child is bored, my child misses her friends, I feel very tired and it's making my child upset. We're frustrated, I'm getting angry, impatient more quickly than before. My children have become clingy. Children are dropping out, as Cynthia said. They don't want to go back to band because it's going to be online. That's not how they want to be. So we're writing up this paper. What's interesting, music was one of the things that remained for most of these families. The kids who were doing music before the lockdown or, you know, safe at home measures, most of them continued. Why? Because music teachers, first of all, were resourceful. They're continuing with their private lessons in the best way they could. It was something they could still do. I don't know what's happening now, right? This is very, but the other thing, looking in newspapers, I always like to, you know, to see what's the word out there. These are just some headlines that you might have seen. So the message is a little bit mixed now, right? So on either the importance of music, you know, the problems of not having music because music is how some kids get through the day in school. We know all of this. Increases in music lessons and so on. So, you know, where are we? You know, that there's just so much going on. So these are two, thinking about these things, what the parents said, what we're seeing out there, what seems to be out there. I wanted us to break up into groups and to talk about, you can talk about the two questions, you can talk about one is a more philosophical question. So how can we promote socio-emotional well-being, prosociality in our students and their families during this pandemic as music teachers? What is our role? What are some of the things that we need to think about? And, or you can also talk about, is there an activity that you have been using that you feel has assisted with music learning, socio-emotional being, or prosociality in your students right now? So just so we share, bounce off ideas. So I'll give you a few minutes to talk in your groups, and then we'll come back and you can group talked about, so we can all share with each other, you know, the frustrations that we're having, but also the successes. I'm sure you're having successes in your studios, in your group lessons. I'm going to stop sharing and I'll let Pat and Kate put us into groups and we can chat.
So while Pat is navigating that, I think everyone will be split automatically. We hope many of you will stay and join. You can join however is most feasible for you. So if you need to leave the camera off, that's fine. If you'd like to turn your camera on, that's also fine. If you do have audio, you can chime in by speaking. If you don't, please feel free to contribute by typing. I think the idea is that we'll discuss for 10 to 15 minutes and then be brought back into the main room. So please, we hope that you'll stay and you'll share some ideas. And I think Pat is just navigating the logistics of splitting everybody into a breakout room. So you should be moved automatically from our larger group into a smaller group to enable you to chat. Hello, everyone. I think we've all arrived back in the main space.
Okay, so, well, thank you for staying on. I heard lots of great ideas. So who would like to share something that you've talked in your group, or something or positive message or anything? Tell us about your conversation.
Barbie?
Yeah, so I talked about how actually before COVID, my child was playing at a nursing home, and that was a source of great joy both for the residents and for my kids. And then once the COVID hit, I tried very hard to connect with them, and it just couldn't happen. But since then, I've been trying to reach out to other nursing homes. We finally have one where we're going to go play for them on the rooftop in Oakland. So it's actually quite nice. But just generally, I've been telling my students, how can you use music as a gift? Because it's something that is, of course it connects people, but people, as you mentioned, Dr. Ilari, that it's been such a source of soothing for so many people. And one thing that did happen was that I have been playing music at my neighbor's garage. We play rock and roll and country music. And I wanted to invite my father-in-law to come and listen, distanced, but he had to go and be in the hospital he had heart palpitations. And so we ended up just setting him up, and he had the best time just listening to this music that he loved. So I'm just trying to get my students to think about that, and then bringing them both either physically or via video to connect with others, especially the senior population.
That's great.
Let's see here.
Yeah. Anyone else would like to share?
I see a hand from Ruth.
Hi, yes, something that was mentioned a couple times in our group was having physical objects that can be shared on both sides of the screen. So teachers talked about driving it to their students' houses, their mailing, and then that sort of helps them distinguish that I'm not a YouTube video, you know me, we both are using this same object. And I think that's true of an instrument, but also they talked about just manipulatives or a chart that they can send. And I think that's really interesting as a way to reinforce that we're people and we're interacting because we both have this thing we can use together.
I'll take that as a moment to just show some people, just because I'm excited about what we've done. So in our group classes, a lot of times, it's so cacophonous if everybody's unmuted and things. And so when my teachers are talking about fast and slow, and the kids can hold up their animals that we've sent to them, or loud and soft. And not only are they looking toward us to see if they've gotten Presto and Largo correct, but they're looking to each other, right? And what we've seen too is that kids then, really young kids, 2 years old, 3 years old, will run to another room and get a toy that also represents something loud, also that represents something slow to them. So we know that they're interacting with each other and not just like kind of giving us the right answer. And then we've had a lot of things to encourage other things that parents can do when we're not on the screen. Again, going back to like how they're the home teacher, and now with everybody's schedules being so crazy, and we have to be respectful that not every home is going to be, on a daily schedule that works for them. We have to be flexible. Giving parents, we've mailed parents little devices so that they can make meditation jars and work on our mindfulness that we talked about yesterday, or, small instruments and things. But anything that we can hold on one side and the students can hold on the other is really helping them interact with each other and with us. But it's most important that the parents have activities that they can then continue in their week when they do need some structure, when they do want to encourage continued learning and not some of the things that Beatrice had said about stress and anxiety in the home, about having something that's available to them, and also then the recorded class they can come back to. And yes, that is more of a YouTube thing, but they recognize us and they can also work with their box of goodies that they've gotten from us. Has been something we didn't know in March, and now that we're really implementing for every age, but especially for the little kids going into the fall.
I'd like to add to that I'm very fortunate. I'm very lucky to have read something before I started the COVID-19 online lesson in March. Something about when we started the Zoom lessons, our student families could feel there's a sense of invasion into their house because it's different from coming to a neutral classroom. So when I designed to send out the big Ziploc of manipulatives to my students, I try to think about something that they can visually show me their dynamics. Visually, they show me the speed of the bowing. And I try to think of something, toys that will make noise, so that even when there's time lagging or if any technical issue happens, I can hear and I can see, and they themselves feel the response has this immediate cause effect. So all the toys that I think about is something that they can, without any playing techniques barrier, they can express their feeling to me right away. So I found that a really great way to help them ease this huge difference and huge impact and huge confusion, especially with my big pre-twinkle group of kids. And the other one that I just shared before we left the private room was that for my super shy students and who have trouble dealing with many faces in front of them, I encourage them to disable the video when it's their time, when they want to play, and that somehow help them feel better. So we could hear them, but they don't feel like they've been watched. So these are a couple strategies I've been using, and that's actually bringing, it can almost maybe want to, have tears. I feel very strong sense of community during this time, even stronger than ever. So I hope that helped everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Shuyi. I did want to chime in and say a theme that came out in some of our group's discussions was about creating community, not just through musical activities or musical context, but bringing people together and, say, letting children share photos and drawings that they've done. So, or bringing parents together and letting them just talk over coffee or sort of compare notes about successes and challenges, and letting people create those connections so that they feel supported and integrated into something larger than just their parent-child dyad or their Suzuki triangle. So we had some great ideas in that vein coming from our group discussion. And I would encourage anyone who has ideas or resources or links, please put them in the chat. And also feel free to send them to Pat or myself, and we could always share them after the fact. We'd love for everyone to learn from each other because we're all really figuring this out as we go along. We have just a few minutes. Is there anyone who's got, a final insight that they would desperately like to make sure gets shared before we conclude our session today? Pat, maybe it's back to you.
I'll just say that we had a couple ideas in the breakout room I was in that I thought were pretty unique that I hadn't heard. One was about a virtual practice room where kids could come in and sign up, and they would practice with their mute with their mic muted. And then when they got something that they wanted to share with everyone else, they would unmute and say, "Hey, everybody, listen, look what I can do now." And so I just thought that was a really unique idea. One of our teachers, Shinobu, talked about pairing or having a group class with kids in the United States. So across continents, having a group class and how they were miles and miles and hours apart, but they could still make music together. And that was kind of a unique situation for them. So, and then making programs or recitals or Zoom calls with nursing homes was another idea that came through in our breakout room. And there are others, but those were ones that I can think of off the top of my head. Anyone else want to share? One last call.
Or Beatrice, do you perhaps have a take-home message or parting benediction for us all today after sharing all your thoughts and your data?
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you for, taking the time. I know that our schedules are all crazy and everyone is super busy, perhaps even busier than before. And it's a paradox, um, but thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing. I think what I wanted to say to you is that I think, we're hearing a lot, we're in this together in the news, at least here in California all the time. We see that. And I think I want us to go back to in early childhood, we talk a lot about it takes a village, but we are the village, right? So I think we need to have these spaces where we can, share like Shuyi shared with us and everybody shared, and also to take care of ourselves, because we're being told as teachers, well, you have to do this for your student. My university is doing that. You have to do this and accommodate. Who's accommodating for me? Village, right? How can we, support each other as educators, because we all have, the same, interests. We want our kids to be musical. We want them to love music as much as we all love. So we are here together. We are the village. Please reach out. Feel free to reach out to me. I think as Kate said, send information. Let's share what we're learning, the lessons learned from all of this. And hopefully we'll be together so we can actually hug each other. I love hugs, so we can hug each other. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Beatrice. Those were very wise words for us. Just one other announcement. The proceedings for today are on the IRSTE.org site. You'll be receiving that email I said with the link to all of our sessions from Saturday, Wednesday, and today. And we'll also have in there an evaluation that we would like you to complete so we know how to move forward in the future, and maybe there's some other ways that you think we might be able to reconnect as a research organization. So thank you so much, and best wishes as we all begin our new academic year in this new way of teaching. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.